situation.
All right, so today we're excited because we have a special guest with us. Her name is Patricia, also known as Pattie Trujillo, with us from Sensible Planning. Pattie is a life insurance agent who also specializes in helping families pre-plan for their funeral needs by purchasing policies tailored for their goals. We recently met Pattie at the grand opening of Compassion Funeral Home in San Antonio. Pattie, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Cool. So we're really looking forward to this conversation. But as always, let's start with the essential question. Should I buy a life insurance policy or a prepaid planning policy? And what are the key differences between them?
All right, so we're going to start with the basics. Pattie, can you explain the difference between a life insurance policy and a pre-planning policy?
Okay. A life insurance policy is a policy that you can use to cover the funeral and cemetery needs at the time of death. But it can also be used for the family, especially for a spouse, the remaining spouse, to be able to adjust to a new way of living. They can use that money to help give them time off from work, to help them regroup, and to be able to get reaccustomed to a new way of life, a new way of paying bills, a new way of moving on. So that's a life insurance. A funeral plan, a pre-plan, that is essential because it assigns a funeral home with specific services, whether it's traditional burial or cremation.
Okay. So are there situations where having both of those types of policies might be beneficial?
Yes. So a lot of my clients, a lot of the families I work with, they're seniors. They're living on a fixed income. So with them on a funeral plan, there's two types of plans you can get. You can purchase a protected plan, which means if for whatever reason, if you pass away before it's paid out, then the little protection on the insurance on the funeral plan, it covers the rest of the cost, the remaining cost of the funeral plan.
Okay.
Then there's the funeral plan that, to make it simple, it's like putting your funeral in layaway. You're freezing the cost, you're still assigning the service, you're still assigning the funeral home, but it's without the protection. So in that case, if the person passes away before it's paid off, there's still a remaining balance due. The funeral home cannot come and change the pricing, but they are entitled to collect the remaining balance. So that's where a life insurance policy can jump in and cover the remaining balance for the family, so they don't have to worry about where they're going to get the money to cover the fund, to cover the services for.
Okay. So is there, I guess, a specific time that if we had our pre-planning done, a specific time that we'd have to wait for that payout for the pre-plan?
So just like with any insurance policy, there is that 2-year contestable period. So if with a pre-plan, if they pass away due to their health, the insurance company does have the right to investigate and see why the person passed away. If it was due to pre-existing conditions, maybe a situation that they did not reveal to the agent while writing the policy. Once they make their conclusion, at that point, they'll decide to pay out from there. However, if it's due to an accident, people pass in accidents all the time. Something beyond the control of the person, then there's a payout. They will pay out to the funeral without a problem.
Okay.
As long as their death can be classified as an accident, there won't be a problem with getting paid out. Otherwise, with everything else, it's a 2-year wait.
Some people might think their traditional life insurance is enough to cover their funeral. What are some hidden costs they might not be aware of, though?
Our police escorts, the flowers, the honorarium to pay for clergy to come and preside over the service, the opening and closing of the grave, the cemetery, if they haven't already purchased it, is not a part of the funeral plan. Even though they work together to complete the same goal, they're two separate entities. So if they don't have their cemetery, that's something that they would have to cover, where with the life insurance, that will come in and help cover those costs for the family as well.
Cool.
Mm.
I like the layaway analogy where you're kind of doing a layaway for yourself, I guess.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, it's how many times do we pay for things that we really don't see a return on it? And really, for ourselves, we're not going to see a return on it, but it's going to benefit the family. They'll see the return on it.
yeah, and
Mm.
that's I think that's probably the biggest benefit for having that pre-plan is locking the costs in today for the future.
Yes.
Mhm.
So
Yes.
that's a good thing. So so I'm a cancer survivor.
Mhm.
I've been cancer free since 2017 because of the way that the 1 year time frame. I was diagnosed in 16, and I'm told I'm not eligible for life insurance until I've been at least cancer free for 10 years. Is that really accurate?
No, that's not. And I can say that because I personally helped a friend of mine who had cancer. She is a cancer survivor as well. And she had been cancer free for 5 years. And I was able to get her day one coverage for and at a really good rate because she was cancer free the 5 years. Um, like I tell all my families, all the insurance companies that I work with, they will pull a prescription check. They will see what medications you have, and they may want to speak with you and ask questions depending on what comes up on that prescription check. But they'll be able to tell you right away you're qualified or if you're not. And I was able to get her qualified even though she was only 5 years cancer free.
Okay, that's good news.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So,
For those considering a pre-planning policy, can you walk us through how it works and what it typically covers?
The way I do it with my families is I have them choose their funeral home. I work with independent funeral homes, so if they don't have a particular funeral home yet, I show them what I have to offer. Then I ask them what type of service they're wanting. And regardless if it's a traditional burial or a cremation, I do still ask if they have cemetery. Because even if they have the cemetery, they may choose to do cremation. And then that's where I offer them, did you know you can still have your cremains interred into a cemetery? You don't, so some people think, well, I bought cemetery. Now I wasted my money because now I want cremation. No, you didn't. You can still use it for your cremains. It's never a waste. You can still use it for your cremains.
so just having that plot purchased
Yes.
or have it on a layaway
Yes.
for you later is beneficial. Make sure that your funeral home knows what you have
Yes,
and all that.
exactly. Because sometimes families, okay, so let me backtrack a little bit, especially in the Hispanic community. I don't know why this is, but in the Hispanic community, nobody wants to say, oh, I have a life insurance policy, I have a funeral plan, because right away the thought is they're only going to want me for my money. My family's only here because of the money, right? So they don't tell anybody. Cemetery is the same way. Cemetery is it's a valued property. It's registered with the city. So they don't tell anybody. The problem comes when that person passes away. They want a traditional burial, but because mom or dad never said we bought cemetery, now they're buying more property. That's where it can, I don't want to say it this way, but and it's not wasted still. That family can still claim it, but it's just more of a process.
Is there a way for a person to say, like, okay, are you able to check to see if my loved one had a spot reserved somewhere? Like, is there somewhere that you can find that information?
I'm being very honest. I wish there was like a major directory of all the cemeteries with everybody that has purchased a plan. Unfortunately, there isn't. That's why I stress the importance to my families. Tell somebody that you have this plan. Tell
Mhm.
somebody that you've already prepaid it, that you're paying on it, that it's there. Because the worst time to find things out is after the fact. Um, I have a cousin, I had a cousin whose dad had passed away and he knew he had life insurance. So I helped to guide him through that, picking a funeral home and the service and everything. Well, he had enough to cover cremation, but everybody wanted him to have a traditional burial, so he had to borrow money. 2 or 3 months later, he finally decided to go through his dad's papers. he found a pre-plan in his dad's papers, which would have alleviated so much stress.
Wow.
Oh,
So it wasn't lost. He was still able with the death certificate to make a claim and get the money back. But it would have just saved him a lot of stress and heartache if he had told his son, this is what I have for when the time comes.
wow.
So
That's kind of crazy.
That was actually going to be one of my questions was, if you invest in a plan and then there's money left over, can it go back? In this situation, the plan was never used,
yes.
so the money can go back to the
Yes.
family.
So
Yeah,
like I
but the
said,
thing-
it's never lost. It just it would have alleviated a lot of the stress had my cousin known. And he was an only child, so it's not like he could depend on siblings. So yeah, it would have alleviated a lot of stress if his dad
I
would have
wonder
just
if that if he actually, if the cover of the funeral today was more than when Dad paid for it way back when,
Yeah.
and settling that difference, because it probably didn't. Probably what he paid was more than
Yes, it
Dad
was.
had. Oh wow.
It was more. It was the his life insurance was a $10,000 insurance policy. He was still short about another 15. So yeah, it would have
1,500.
really saved him.
He was short 1,500.
15,000 he borrowed.
Oh
to
my
prep-
gosh!
Yeah.
Wow. Oh man. Now, one thing that you said, I want to back up to also. You mentioned that I think you said, and correct me, that he was going to do a cremation, but the family wanted a traditional burial. Now,
Yes.
is that now when let me also say for listeners who are learning, like we're all learning here, traditional burial in this sense is meaning like the embalming, the coffin, and that kind of stuff. Is that what you?
Yeah. Well, no, that's almost correct. A traditional burial means that the person is going to be buried in a casket. That's a traditional burial. Because even with a cremation with the viewing, that would still entail the embalming, the rental casket for the viewing. So the embalming would still be taking place. Now, embalming is not required by law in the state of Texas. The funeral homes strongly suggest it just to protect the family, like in case. And I don't ask me why this happens, but sometimes the services don't happen for a few weeks. So it helps to maintain the integrity of the body, especially when the funeral services aren't going to be for a few weeks. So that's where the embalming comes into play.
Your cousin, right? He wanted to have a cremation, but the family wanted a traditional burial.
Yeah.
So, which costs more money? And obviously, you just said like all that cost that he incurred,
Yeah.
to make the family happy.
Yeah.
And this goes back to, I know, like, kind of what our whole topic is on our podcast is communicating. Like you
Yes.
said, like some families have a hard time with sharing the information
Yeah.
for different reasons.
Yeah.
So for us to encourage our listeners to please communicate with your family and save them the heartache and save them, like, what do you want? Because to me, it would mean like, what did that person want? Like for me, I would not have wanted all the added expense to my family. I would have preferred to minimize cost, if I could. So, communicating that from myself to my family to let them know that. And then if it's up to my immediate family, my children, my husband, to say that, like, and I would be, I'm sorry, like if the rest of the family wanted something different, but it's what I wanted. So I feel like us stressing for us to all communicate with our loved ones, please. Like, it's nothing to hide. It'd be very helpful.
Yeah, I wonder what Dad wanted. What did Dad want, or did he specify that? And that might have been the issue with the son trying to decide what to do.
Mm-hmm.
If he knew exactly, like you said, this is what I want. I don't want this to cost a lot. I put around money for you to take care of me.
Yeah.
I don't want it to be a burden. Here's the plan. So it sounds like this pre-plan is really customizable. But say our wishes over time changes, like if they get, aquamation, is that what it's called?
Or
Aquamation?
human
Or
composting.
human composting or something like that. Or, we want to do a green burial because Fort Sam now accepts a green burial.
With they don't yet, but
Not yet. If they do, if that
Mhm.
changes, the law changes, we have a petition and we win and all that other stuff. Let's get with the times.
Oh,
Um,
yes.
if something like that happens where we change our minds, how
Mhm.
easy is it to change that policy?
So I'm glad you asked that question because I'm dealing with that with my mother. My mother has her plan, it's paid out. She paid for 4 urns, 4 companion urns for each of me and myself and my sisters. So we'll each get a part of her and my dad. But now she wants to change it to a green cremation. She wants to still be cremated, but she wants her cremains interred um, in a green burial. So now that is considered a downgrade from what she has right now. So we were on the phone actually this morning with the insurance company with how to get this done. And because her plan is paid off, um, it's still considered, even though it's a pre plan, it's considered a life insurance policy. So if we would cancel that plan, she would actually lose money to do that. So what we're going to do instead, and I already spoke with the funeral home, we're going to transfer her plan to another to this funeral. We're actually transferring her to Compassion. And then at the time of her passing, we're going to change it. She'll still do a cremation, but instead of it being a cremation with the viewing and all the extras that she was going to have that she originally wanted, now it's going to be a direct cremation with a burial. So we're going to be burying her cremains along with my dad out at Countryside because that's now what she wants.
Hmm.
So,
That kind of makes sense,
mhm,
because what you talked about getting the money back if you don't use it all, if you change it, as long as you're not stepping up, then you'd incur extra costs. You're
yes,
stepping down, then you should receive those costs in return.
yes.
Mhm. And
Yes,
then
so that's
that
what we're gonna do.
and then that's documented. I mean, I know that she's your mom, right? And
Mhm.
you obviously work at Compassion or you partner with them, I think, right?
Yes,
So then if something were to happen to you, this is documented in her paperwork then,
we will be getting it documented.
and
That's the next
then
step. Once we get it transferred over, the next step is to get everything documented. In that case, if for whatever reason I cannot fulfill her wishes, we're gonna make sure her wishes are fulfilled the way she wants.
and
Yeah,
the funeral home is able to honor
Yes,
accommodate
honor
that.
those
Yeah,
wishes.
yes,
Okay.
yeah, because when my father passed, my mother, he had a will, but she knew what he wanted to do and didn't want to be on life support, didn't want to be. He wanted a quote unquote traditional.
yeah,
But I don't know what that word means anymore because there's so many different traditions that have gone by the wayside since people have started burying people.
yeah,
But she was lucky to have all four of us, the siblings, agree with her.
yeah.
So I think documenting in case you have a rogue sibling out there that wants to change something.
Well, and the documentation for me, it's very important because I do have one sibling who has been against the whole pre-planning from the very beginning.
Hmm.
So I've I've made it very clear to my mother. We we argued and we fought when my dad passed away. I'm not doing it again. You are my mother. You are the
Mhm.
last parent I have. The last thing I want to do is fight when you're gone.
Mhm.
I it's
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
it's not fun. It's not easy.
that's and I would hope that when my mother passes, that we can get everybody in line the same way.
Yeah.
But we're going to make sure that this is taken care of for her, so we don't have to worry about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, all right. So next question. What happens if someone moves or they're traveling there on vacation to another state or even a country? Will their pre-planning policy still apply?
Okay, so that one's it's not loaded, but it's loaded. So your funeral plan. Let's start with the traveling side. Okay.
Okay.
So there are separate policies that you can purchase that only cover traveling. Okay. So if you're someone who, I'm going to use myself in this example. Now I'm traveling to Pakistan, right? So if God forbid something should happen to me in Pakistan, this little plan, it's less than $500. This will cover the cost of me being sent back home. This will bring me back to my funeral home. This travel plan does have to be attached to a funeral home because that's the whole purpose of it. But for less than $500, it'll cover me being embalmed. It'll cover the cost of me being shipped to the funeral home that I choose. And that really does save a lot of money. When I first started in pre-planning, I had a friend of mine. Oh my goodness, I can share so many stories. I had a friend of mine. She was selling funeral plans with us. And when she retired, she did funeral planning part-time. She was retired, so it's not like she needed to make income, but she enjoyed helping people. So she had started traveling with her church. The last trip she took was to France. The last city they were going to visit was Lourdes. So she talked about it for months before she left. And she said, if I die in Lourdes, I will die a happy woman. Well, let me tell you, she made it to Lourdes and she passed away in the lobby waiting for her hotel room.
Wow.
Wow.
This woman had her funeral done and paid, her cemetery done and paid. She did have a life insurance and she had this travel plan. Now, this travel plan isn't going to make it to where you're going to be back home right away, but it covered all the costs of her coming back. Wow. It covered her death certificate in Lourdes. It covered the cost of translating the death certificate into English to send it back with her to come back home. It was a 30-day process, but she came back home. The family didn't have to worry about any extra costs, any extra hidden fees or anything. And then we were still able to do her service.
Wow.
I bet that was some anxious times, though, making sure that.
Well, because before then, I never heard of a travel plan.
Yeah.
And so my manager, he's like, look, Pattie, this is what we need to be offering people. People travel. And at that time, I'm like who travels? Well, my mother travels a lot. She goes to Oklahoma to see my sister. Mm-hmm. This is a perfect plan for her. The cost of transporting a body, even between cities, it gets expensive because they start charging per mile. I had a cousin whose husband passed away in Houston. It's only 3 hours. They charged her $600 to bring him back. Wow. My friend whose brother passed away in Tennessee, I believe it was Tennessee, it was over $1,000 to bring him back. So for less than $500, yeah, it covers all of that. It covers all that cost.
Well, okay. So what, in this case, like, what if you didn't die after all in another country or another state? You just died where you live. Is that an instance where you would get that money back if you didn't use that part, or no?
No, unfortunately,
okay.
It doesn't work that way.
Okay.
But you're paying for the protection.
Exactly.
Is that a per trip payment, or is it just a blanket?
A one and done. You're either going to use it or you're not.
On the ones where you mentioned about like Houston or Tennessee, mm-hmm. Is it similar to like the out of country one where it could take 30 days?
Oh no, it won't take that long.
Okay.
In state, it's a lot easier because one thing I learned being in the funeral homes is funeral homes all across the country all communicate. They all communicate together for these exact situations. So this was the situation with my friend whose brother passed away in Tennessee. She was the one that was concerned with how she was going to bring him back. And that's when I told her, I said, look, let the funeral homes do their job. Your job is to take care of yourself. I need you to take care of you. All you need from for your brother is what hospital he's in, who's the attending physician, what floor he's on, and a contact number. That way, the funeral home here will get in touch with the funeral home there, give them that information. They'll take care of receiving your brother, take care of whatever they need to do with him to send him back home. Let them do their job. So that's one thing I did learn being inside the funeral home, is that all the funeral homes communicate. They all work together to be able to get their loved ones of the families back to where they need to go.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Cool.
So earlier you had said that the plot is real property, right?
Yes.
So that you own that,
Yes.
that little square piece of land there.
Yes.
So when we're thinking about tax considerations for people, are there any tax considerations people should be aware of with pre-planning policies? For example, does it interfere with Medicare, Medicaid, or any of that stuff? Or should the funds be placed in a irrevocable pre-planned funeral contract?
Okay, so all funeral plans, there's no taxes on it. Okay, there's no taxes on it. Now, when it comes to people who are on Medicare, who are on Medicaid especially, this is considered an insurance policy. It's not going to build cash value right away, but especially for the senior who is dependent on the Medicaid benefits, we can put an irrevocable on it because everyone is entitled to a funeral with dignity. And so with the irrevocable on it, it takes away that cash value. So they're still able to pay towards their funeral. It's just not going to count as an insurance policy anymore.
Okay.
Are those more expensive, and is that something you can handle or any insurance person could handle?
Yep, that's something anybody can handle, and there's no extra cost for that.
Really? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's
It's just a simple form saying that you wish to take away the cash value to that.
And that sounds like something I think people should probably do then, so it doesn't mess with their Medicaid then.
Yes, yes.
And would most insurance agents offer that as guidance or not?
Only if they're doing pre-planning, because life insurance is different.
Okay.
Life insurance is, we cannot put an irrevocable on a life insurance. We can put an irrevocable on a pre-need. Typically, when a family member needs to go, say, into an assisted living, and they're needing help with Medicaid to help cover the costs, life insurance is considered a liquidable asset. So they'll need to do a spend down. Okay, so that means they will have to sell their policy. So how we as pre-need agents can help them is where they have to cash out that policy, we can help them use that money towards a funeral plan, put the irrevocable on it and leave it alone. That way it stays covered. Or if they already have a funeral plan on it, we can take the funds that they're getting from that insurance policy and pay off whatever balance they have. That way it stays paid, the irrevocable is on it, and nobody can touch it. It's already taken care of.
Okay.
Another thing that can be done with the insurance policy is we can change the owner of the policy. So I could still be the beneficiary of the policy, but it won't count against me anymore if I put my son as the owner of the policy. He's the one that's managing it. I'm just going to be the one who will be able to benefit if he needs to use it to pay for any burial services or anything else. Or at that time, he'll be able to cash it out once he gets my death certificate.
Cool.
Interesting.
Yeah. I hate taxes.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's enough to pay after the death. You don't need to add more to pay.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are some misconceptions people have about funeral pre-planning policies?
Oh gosh, where can I start? The biggest one I get is, if I get it, I'm gonna die.
Oh yeah.
So my answer, before I used to like try to skirt around it and, oh no, that's not going to happen. I stopped skirting. I'm like, I got something to tell you. You're going to die. I'm going to die. You're going to die. We're all going to die.
It's gonna
Nobody's
happen.
promised a forever life.
Mhm.
The question is, how are you going to leave your family when you do die? I mean, there's just so much. That's the question. How are you going to leave your family when you're not here? That's the biggest one. The other one, and this one I direct more to myself because when I was in high school, I come from a huge family. Let me just say that real quick. So I grew up with my second cousins. My mother grew up with my first cousins. So the only reason why I started believing in funeral plans was in high school. My aunt, she retired. She sold her insurance policies. She pulled out her 401k. She paid for her funeral, my uncle's funeral, cemetery, headstone. She paid for just about everything she could. And she told my mother she needed to do the same thing. Now, mind you, I'm 17 years old. My aunt is here talking about planning her funeral. And I'm thinking, who does this? Only crazy people do this. So I told my mother, just get a life insurance policy. You'll be okay. Just get a life insurance policy. You're not going to die for a very long time. You'll be okay. When my dad passed away, we had a life insurance policy, but we didn't know what to do with it when he died. We didn't know who to call. I wasn't working at the time. I was a stay-at-home mom. We ended up at a funeral home because my baby sister's father-in-law had passed away. I couldn't find the funeral home to get there. I got there, found out how much they wanted to charge us. That created an argument. Me being the older sister, thankfully in my family, and to be honest, he was my stepdad, but he raised us. I took care of him at the end. So yeah, I felt I had a say. That created an argument. But we were able to bring down the cost of the cremation that we were doing and took care of the service. When I found out when my aunt passed away, I asked my cousin, I said, how did it go for your grandma? She goes, well, what do you mean? I said, well, she said she had all this stuff taken care of. Was it really true or was it a scam? Was it a lie? Did your grandma really get what she wanted? She says, well, grandma already had everything paid. I upgraded her casket, so that was a little bit of a cost. I paid for the opening and closing and the escorts. I said, yes. How much did you pay? That's what I want to know. I paid about $2,000. My mouth dropped. My aunt had everything taken care of. They upgraded her casket, did the incidentals that are not covered in a pre-plan, and it was only $2,000. That's when I turned around and I told my mom, you want your plan? I know someone who can help you. And a friend of mine helped her with her plan. I was like, I'm not doing this again with my sisters. I'm not going to argue with them. So that's when my mother got her plan. And then that was in December of 2016 and 2017, that's when I started selling.
Oh,
Wow.
And yeah, this is probably going to sound morbid, but it's the best thing I've done because I've been able to help many families just get through that part, get through that stress, not leave that stress to their family. I've helped several of my own family. And that's the hardest part, is helping my own family,
Yeah, I bet.
especially when they're very reluctant, but
mhm.
I feel blessed with the position that I have. I feel very fortunate to be here. Um,
Mm.
and I'm grateful for the opportunity to help my families the way that I do.
Well, and I'm sure they appreciate your expertise. I mean, like everything you've shared with us today has been very helpful. What should someone look for when they choose a provider for a pre-planning policy?
A lot of people choose funeral homes because their whole family have always used them, or they visited a service that, oh my God, it was just so beautiful, or for whatever reason, they didn't like it. And then the biggest thing is to choose a funeral home that fits with their budget. Like I said, they all do the same thing. No funeral home is different than the other. It's really, you're paying for the name. Walmart, just like you can get them at JCPenney's and Macy's. Their clothes, they're going to cover your body. It's really, a lot of people look at what they can afford, what their budget can cover. So there's many times where I'll pick the funeral home. They'll tell me the difference between this, and this. That's fine. I will do that to show them what they're looking at, because that's an important part for them. So it's really what they're comfortable with, where they're comfortable with, and what they're comfortable with paying.
So, talking about paying stuff. So I'm a veteran. I have certain benefits,
Yes.
so that when my time comes that I'll be buried, like being buried at Fort Sam. That's
Mhm.
where I'd like to be buried. Can you shed some light on what veterans should consider when they're doing their pre-planning? What should they still consider purchasing as part of the policy?
Um, the first thing I tell my veterans is what they have available to them. They have the cemetery. That includes opening and closing. That's going to include the liner. That does include the headstone. Um, and that does include a space for the spouse. So on the headstone, the serviceman or woman would be in the front, and
Mhm.
the spouse would be listed on the back. But it does include the space for the spouse as well. Now, as far as the service, it's all the funeral homes work with Fort Sam. Have your DD 214 ready. In the pre-planning guide I give them, I tell them put your birth certificate, a copy of your social, and your DD 214, insurance policies, any documents that you feel your family is going to need, put it there so it's all in one place. Now, as far as the funeral home, they can choose any funeral home they want. Um, I strongly suggest, from experience, that, and for me, this is a very important thing, um, that the family request an honor guard from the military. And I say this because, had I known this before, my uncle passed away and they didn't order an honor guard. The funeral home played taps from a recording, and we just had a moment of silence. And he served in the military. He retired from the military. And he could have been buried in Fort Sam. I'm not sure why he wasn't. It wasn't until my cousin lost her husband. And on that part, I have to say I was blessed, because at the time, my niece was serving here in Fort Sam, and she was doing I keep forgetting, I think it was the honor guard detail. So she was responsible with getting with the families and making sure the servicemen attended the services and everything. So the funeral home we were working with at that time, they were wanting to get the VFW to come and do the service. So I called my niece, and my niece was like, no, we can get the military out there. And that's when I found out the family has to request it. They have to make sure that the funeral home puts in a request to Fort Sam to get someone from the honor guard to be there. So that's definitely important. It's not just enough to have your DD 214. The DD 214 helps the funeral home to acquire the flag for the family, but also to make sure that the family has to make sure that they're going to get the honor guard from the military.
Yeah.
Now, the VFW can still show up. Anybody else, American Legion or whatever other group is out there, they can still show up. But to me, it's very important, because to serve in our military is not something to take lightly. There's a lot of sacrifices that come with that. Time away from the family, time away from the spouse, the children, time away from life. And it's not even a guarantee that you're going to come back home. So when you're able to come back home, that is a huge blessing. That is something big. So if you're able to come back home and have your life and have your wife and have your children, you should be honored in the end, because that was a risk you took. That's just me. But to me, it's very important that they need to request the honor guard to be there. It's not enough just to make sure your DD 214 is there. Make sure that the funeral home, whoever you choose, sends in a request to Fort Sam that the honor guard is there. That's what they're there for. That is their job. Now, it is dependent on whatever is happening around the world and whatever the situation is, but that is still, to me, that is the last symbol of love from your country thanking you for the service, for your ultimate sacrifice. And if you were able to make it home, thank you for being with your family. Thank you. They should at least do that. Had I known this before from my uncle, I would have said something before, but I didn't know anything at the time. Now that I do, I try very hard to educate my families that this is available to them, and it's not any extra cost. It's just extra work on the part of the funeral home.
Yep.
So
That's cool.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
you're welcome.
And then in terms of spouses of veterans, is there anything spouses should be aware of?
So the spouse is always an interesting topic. Make sure that on the DD 214, on the military paperwork, whatever exit military paperwork your husband or your wife have from leaving the military, that you're listed as the spouse. This is very important when divorces come into play. So just make sure that you're listed as the spouse.
Yeah.
And that, so if you don't have a DD 214, get on it now. The process can take a while. It's the military. Hurry up and wait. It's what it is. So get on it now. You can go through their website. They have all the forms on there. They do have to be faxed in, but it's all there to get it done.
Yeah.
It's not a matter of going to Fort Sam and they'll get it taken care of right away. It's a process. Okay, but that's something that you want to make sure that you're listed on the paperwork. You are entitled to burial at Fort Sam with your spouse, whether you're the first one or the last one. You're entitled to the burial. For children, as long as they're under 18, they can be buried there at Fort Sam as well. I worked a service where a child, unfortunately, was buried there because his dad had served. So the child can be buried there.
Yeah.
An adult child can be buried there if they can show proof of disability with the dad's or the parents' DD 214. So yes, there are a lot of benefits that people don't realize that they are entitled to.
Cool.
It's just a matter of going and looking.
So talking about benefits and cost, could you give us an average, not exact, but close to, how much does it cost to get that pre-planning policy? And is it cheaper to pay it in full or get it on a payment plan?
Okay, so it's really going to depend on the person's budget. If you can afford to pay it in full, by all means, go for it. You're looking roughly ballpark for a traditional burial, nothing extravagant, about between $55,000 to $7,000.
Okay.
It depends on the funeral home, but that's your ballpark, between $55,000 to $7,000. Now, if you're going to make it in payments, if you're getting a protected plan, there's an insurance on it, so that it's going to be a little bit more by the end of whatever payment term you pay. And we'll show you on there, like, this is what your plan is. This is what you're going to pay by the time you finish paying it off.
Okay.
But even that amount is going to outweigh how much it's going to cost in the future. But that protection, that little bit of extra money on there is to help offset the cost if you pass away before it's paid out.
Exactly.
So, it's like our car insurance. We never go out and say, today's the day I'm going to use it. Most of us, you pay for it and we never use it,
Right.
So
it's when you don't have it, it's don't happen.
That's when it happens. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Pattie, I know we talked about this earlier. I just have a follow-up question, but it's about if there's money left over on the pre-planning policy.
Mhm.
When the policy is set up, is there like a beneficiary? So then that's who the money goes to, or how is it determined how the money is paid out if there's any left over?
If there's any left over, there is a beneficiary on there.
I see. Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
there is a beneficiary on there. That beneficiary person, most of the time, it's very rare instances where there is money left over, but that beneficiary person is usually the point of contact that will make the final decision for the services. But It never hurts because you just never know when there's going to be money left over.
Yeah.
In my mother's case, because we're downgrading at that time, there may be some money left over because we're going from a full service and all the extras that she paid for to now a direct cremation. So we're going from all of it to nothing.
If there is money left over, how long does it take to get it back?
It takes usually between 2 to 4 weeks. Just by the time they do all the processing and the paperwork, then they pay the funeral home first, and then whatever's left over goes to the family.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. Wow. I think we've talked about so much today.
Yeah.
And, I wrote down travel insurance, and
Yes.
underlined it a couple times. So we got to do that. So thank you. Is there any final piece of advice you'd like to share with our listeners today?
The one advice I would say is don't put all your eggs in one basket with your insurance from your job. Because once you quit, you retire, or they fire you, that policy stays with them. You don't take it with you. So where you can, either start a pre-plan or get a life insurance policy outside of your job, because you're not guaranteed to keep it. So
That's good information. So
that would be the main thing.
all right. Well, Pattie, thank you very much for being here today. Where can our listeners find more information about sensible planning and get in touch with you?
You can find me on Facebook at Sensible Planning. You can reach me on my phone at 726-4274. And then I do have an office here on the south side. It's at 1818 South New Braunfels. It's on the corner of Highway 90 and South New Braunfels. You can't miss it. It's the only red building across from McDonald's. I'm on the second floor in the only glass office that's there.
Thank you.
And I can get phone calls. I can get text messages on there.
Back in the day, my grandmother used to give directions off of McDonald's. Say, hey, you know where this McDonald's is? We're right there.
Yeah.
No.
And I'm right across the street from McDonald's.
And when you said that, I'm like, I know where that McDonald's is, because when I take classes at St. Philip's, that's that's like the closest McDonald's. You can just drive there.
Yeah.
But anyway, before we wrap up, I just thought about a quote that we used to say in the Army, and I'm not going to say it exactly because it's got some vulgar words in it, but it's poor planning on your part is not an emergency on my part. But I think for this, it becomes an emergency for the family, because if you don't do your planning, they're going to go through panic mode at the end trying to get everything right. If you've got everything right, you're good to go. Here's the stuff. You've got it in your binder, and everybody knows where that binder is. Golden.
Yes.
Right. Well, I mean, it gives them the opportunity to actually grieve.
Yes.
Yes.
That's what I mean. I mean, by
And
golden, they don't have to worry about this planning thing, this monster.
Right.
This planning monster that's out there, because you've done it 90% of the job. There's some little things you're going to have to do, but the worry, that burden should be lifted from them.
Yes, exactly.
So don't be that person.
Yes.
So let's go ahead and wrap this thing up. So let's revisit our essential question. Should I buy a life insurance policy or a pre-planned policy? What are those key differences? For me, I think it's kind of a no-brainer, but I'm not going to answer for anybody.
Exactly. All right. Well, thank you for joining us. We hope today's discussion gives you the encouragement to take the next step in your planning journey. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who might benefit. Until next time, remember, every chapter you write today shapes your legacy tomorrow. Thank you for joining us at Thoughtful Planning. And just like the vibrant hues of a setting sun, we're wrapping up another episode of Thoughtful Planning. Every shared story and insight is a step closer to turning uncertainty into celebrations of preparedness.
Absolutely. And to our listeners, remember that every surprise that comes our way is an opportunity to grow, adapt, and learn. Stay tuned for more stories, expert insight, and of course, a touch of wit in our next episode.
We're not just co-hosts, we're fellow travelers on this journey. For more information on additional resources, which will help you take the next step in planning, look for the link in the show notes for our membership. Join us next time for another episode of Thoughtful Planning. Until then, Keep living, laughing, and loving every moment.